welcome our keynote closing speakers, Jeff and Ola. So I hope you will spend this hour very well.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Hello. Yeah, there we go. So, I'd like to introduce everybody to Ola. He is an Agile coach in Sweden for a company called Defined Red Patch. He's a software developer by training. He's also one of the founders of a Gothenburg group called Göteborg Agilister, which is dedicated to bringing Agile and lean methods to as many types of work as possible.
Basically, yeah, please. This is Jeff. Jeff is excellent. Jeff is also an Agile coach, but from another company, NetHouse. He's also very into the Agile community in Gothenburg. Among those people who actually were founding the Agile community in Gothenburg, he has founded the Scrum Beers, which is, if Göteborgs Agilister is about drinking coffee, talking about Scrum, Scrum Beers is about drinking beer, talking about Scrum. You can guess which has survived this year and which hasn't. Basically, yes. In Scrum Beers, we have this motto that for us in the lean and Agile community, continuous flow is very, very important. So we see that we have lots of continuous flow of the beers.
We measure our velocity quite accurately as well, so we know a lot about that. And just a quick note, a lot of people find this to be bizarre, at least in Sweden, where we live. Myself and Ola, you see here, we actually work for completely different organizations, but we collaborate together on a lot of projects for our benefit of both our organizations. So, we have done quite a bit of scaling work in Sweden. We've worked with a lot of Sweden's largest organizations. Not all of them we can name. We have worked with some of Sweden's largest telecoms together and separately. We've also worked with some of its larger IT support organizations, and now we're currently both working with different branches of the state in public sector projects.
Yeah, basically. So we're going to start here doing about the same thing that we started off this morning. We need to know each other a bit more. So I would like to, if you're a coder by profession, raise your left arm. And if you're not a coder by profession, raise your right arm. Yes, okay, that sums it up, right? Okay. You can have different levels in experience of Agile, from almost zero to in the mid to very much, like 0, 1, 2. So 0 experience, slightly experience, much experience, okay? Let me see. Excellent. And now, okay, what are your expression of Agile as a whole, as a concept? Is it sucks? Okay, great. Okay, good.
Well,
good.
That was one of the better ones right there. So, now we know a little bit about you, which allows us to do one of the most important Agile principles. At least by doing this, we've been able to accomplish the inspect part of inspect and adapt, which I'm sure any of you who use Scrum are familiar with this term. How many people are using Scrum at the moment? Cambell? Extreme programming? Making it up as you go along? Okay, great. So we're here today to talk about scaling. It's becoming a very popular issue, becoming very important now that a lot of larger companies are trying to go over to Agile. So the first and most important concept we need to understand when we're talking about scaling, and a lot of people have touched on this already today, is we're not trying to scale Scrum, we're not trying to scale Kanban, we're not trying to scale any particular method. What we're trying to scale is agility. Agility is a principle of an organization, a way in which an organization operates. It's not a property of the methods that we employ. So as everybody knows, just moving notes across a board does not make you agile. So a good way to conceptualize this, the methods themselves are actually very rigid. They're not really agile at all. A good way to look at this is with this wonderful picture we have here. On the top we have a ballet dancer, and then we have a martial arts fighter. These are very agile professions. These people are very adaptable. They change quickly. They're able to do things in really rapid succession. But they don't become this way by accident. They practice a lot of defined practices over and over and over and over again. Practices that are painful, practices that hurt. They do exercises, much like we do with Agile methods. But the exercises are not the goal. They don't train to get good at doing exercises. They train to get agile.
Yeah.
So we are in the business of creating great dancing teams as opposed to getting people to move post-its across the board. Also, we'd like to prefer to create good dancing teams as opposed to good fighting teams.
Yeah. Even if good fighting skills could be excellent, you need some kind of organizational kung fu when you're trying to do Agile in a very, very strict and large organization. So the key here is agility. If we want to scale Agile, and with scaling Agile, we're talking about like doing stuff with enormous amounts of people, or trying to create very complex products where you simply cannot take it to one team. It's agility you want to have. So we need to kind of boil down that agility, and then one must remember why were we agile to begin with. And the sad story is the story, we already have touched it today, about the failing project method or project model of things, where you have a goal here and then you lay out like a railroad, and if you're only able to realize what does it take in order to reach this goal, then it's only about disciplining the organization in order to follow this railroad, this track to the goal. So that's the idea of the project, right? But what we discovered is, okay, we're moving to the goal, but the goal moves as well, out of reach all the time. So basically what the pioneers, people like Ken Schwaber and Kent Beck and Mary Poppendick and those people, what they discovered said that no, we're not supposed to run like trains on a railroad track. We're supposed to be like targeting missiles, homing missiles, you know, the one who actually tries to, or excels in reaching a moving target. And then, how does a homing missile, a targeting missile work? Well, what they do is that they ask themselves, okay, where am I? Here am I, right? And here's my goal. Okay, I go there. Now, where am I? Here am I. Okay, here is my goal. Okay, I have to adjust a bit. I have to adjust a bit. I have to adjust a bit. Where am I? Inspection. And where is my goal and how should we go there? Adaption. Inspect, adapt, inspect, adapt. So when I explain what's the magic behind the methods, the Agile method, like Scrum and everything else, it isn't anything magical. It's just a question about a couple of techniques that are put in a bag, and then we have a method label on them. And what does the technique do? Well, in order to be able to inspect the situation, you need transparency, right? Transparency. And in order to adapt the situations, you need some kind of power. The power of moving the steering stick. So, the Agile techniques basically increase transparency and increase the power in an organization. So, when we say that, we should also remember that power is actually a combination of two things. It's a combination of mandate, that you have the formal right to steer. Mandate. But you also need to have the ability. We have all seen how it goes when management won't have the ability, but they have the mandate, right? It's like you give car keys to an 8-year-old. They have the mandate to drive, but they don't have the ability, so they will lack the power.
I think you just called management an 8-year-old.
Yes. So this is what the Agile, what it takes to receive agility in the organization. That's basically it.
So, scaling. I promise this is the only ugly slide for the rest of the day. When we're talking about scaling, we're talking about scaling along a couple different vectors in an organization. So the first important one is scaling along the value flow, or as we like to visualize it, scaling vertically within the organization. And then we have scaling along the organization. This is about things like teams and how they work. And then, of course, the most important one, which nobody ever talks about, is scaling culture and thinking. How do we scale culture and thinking? There's actually a hidden Easter egg in this slide that I got in here on purpose. You see the spelling of organization here? That's the correct spelling of organization, and the reason that's really important is because it allows me to segue gracefully into telling everybody I'm Canadian and not American, which is very important. So we've gotten that out of the way. Everybody's on board with that. Any Americans in the room? Great. Sorry, I joke. So let's first of all look at scaling the value flow and what we're talking about when we're talking about that. Scaling the value flow in Agile, or at least in software development, is primarily about the backlog. The backlog is one of our main tools for visualizing value flow within an organization. So here we have a typical, this is the Scrum guide example. We're going to talk a little bit about single team Scrum just to establish the context before we go on. So this is a sort of a Scrum guide example of what Scrum looks like. Here we've got a backlog full of features or functions. We've got a definition of ready line. How many people have a definition of ready in their teams currently? Low numbers there. How many people have never even heard the term definition of ready? Okay. And everybody else didn't want to put their hands up. Okay, that's fine. So we've got, large chunks here that flow up the backlog.
Jeff, since there were so many, maybe you should explain it.
I'm getting there.
Okay, you're coming there.
Let me do my thing. Just relax. So we've got large chunks of value that come into the backlog, and as they flow up the backlog, they get divided into small slices, which we have a brilliant team here that can take these slices and they can start working on them. Prioritized by a product owner that is visible by their little hat here. And then we have a definition of ready, which defines the section between these. Most people don't visualize their backlogs in this way. They don't see that there's a difference between the functions and the slices. They're generally just one big long list. But the definition of ready is basically how we decide if something has all of the criteria we need to go and start implementing it. We can't have all these delays with questions and it takes our customer 2 weeks to get back to us when we get into a 2-week sprint, or we're never going to deliver anything. Also, definition of ready, super, super important for providing predictability. If we don't have any sort of, as Cambell always says, you want to reduce variation. If we don't have any sort of a model as to what gets to the top of the backlog, then it could be this big, it could be this big, or it could be, as so often, nobody has any idea how big it is. So a definition of ready, really, really super important and helps teams identify this. But this is the Scrum Guide view of the backlog. It's not really what the backlog looks like in reality. In reality, the backlog looks much more like this. Down here we have a group of people, let's call them stakeholders. They have lots of brilliant ideas. Stakeholders, they come from all over your organization, managers, customers, people who actually pay for the product, other teams, all sorts of people throughout the organization. And they always have lots of great ideas. Unfortunately, these great ideas tend to be very fuzzy. I think we've all been in that meeting where somebody shouts out one line and decides it's the new product we're going to build. Go and build it. Anybody? So we have all these people, they have fuzzy ideas and they want them in the backlog, and what we have is the product owner up here, and they have a look and say, should this end up in the backlog, should it not, does it fit with our goals as an organization? But we can't just let these fuzzy things get to the top of the backlog, so we need to defuzz them and get them broken down into the function level so they can eventually become slices. Do we do that with a lot of complex tools? A lot of processes? A lot of emails? No. No, we do that with face-to-face communication. We do that by getting the groups of people who need to be involved early on and talking to the people who have the fuzzy ideas. Going out and talking to the customers, finding out what their real problem is. We have a great thing we do in my current project. We try to go every sprint if we possibly can and actually sit with the people who use our software, watch them use the software. I know, it's crazy, right? Actually see your user use your software. Who would have thunk it? So collaboration. Oh, sorry, I was going for the laser. The collaboration that takes place down here, super, super important for defuzzing these backlog items before they can move up into functions. And then as they move up into functions, again, we have the team here, which are not trademark infringements, but if you look carefully, you might see the geek reference in there. But not trademark infringement by any means. And we have this group of people, and they collaborate together. After they've moved up into the function section, they make sure their definition of ready is being met, and they break these things down into smaller pieces so that eventually they can actually start working on them. And we all recognize these folks. And look how happy these people are because they have easy things to work on. That's a one-to-one example. I think most of us know about that. Definition of ready we find to be a huge failure point in a lot of teams that we have. Things just get shoved right to the top of the backlog. Nobody's looked at them before. The product owner shows up with 10 new things in the planning meeting and nobody has any idea what it is. So we wanted to do the one-to-one example just to establish that before. And now Ola goes on to how we deal with larger.
Yeah, exactly. Because the thing that we have mentioned here right now, what to do now when we need to have a multiple team solution, when we have lots of pieces of functionality, and you can't really let one team take care of everything because the product is complex or the organization is too complex. Then you need to scale, and then you need to know exactly what aspects of, for instance, Scrum it is that that creates agility in the whole organization, in the whole project. So what we have here is a bunch of ideas of features, but the problem is, where's the laser? Is the red one here? Yeah. The problem is that those features need to be implemented by the red backend people and the blue frontend people, and we can't really mix them together cross-functional in that sense because those two products are so disparate and the things that they have. However, we have people who have special competence in architecturing this kind of solutions. And if we were to have a traditional way of doing things, the architect should have been sitting in the chamber, just doing the requirements and then handing it over to the different teams. But then, as we all know, we won't have any agility because no one would really be able to inspect because we would have too little transparency. So what we also need to have is one person who is the product owner of the whole product. If you look at the blue and the red product owners, they are specialized in the section of their backlogs that has to do with the front end and the back end, respectively. But there must be someone that actually takes responsibility for the whole. So, as always, there are lots of fuzzy ideas. And as always, we need to collaborate. And here, the teams need to be present so that the architect won't work in isolation, but that there's a collaborative way of working in order to take these fuzzy ideas and create good functions. Just as the normal process. However, since this might be a large project and it might be that the rest of the backend team needs to work on other projects simultaneously and the same goes for the front-end team, it might be that we can just have a couple of representatives working together with the architect for this particular project. And here comes the architecturing of the extra complexity that we have when we need to scale a complex solution into many teams, and that is you need to split. You need to split the functions into smaller functions that can go to the backend and the front end simultaneously. And here it's, as usual, important that we don't say that, well, this architect is the boss of this slicing, because the people, the representatives from the different from the component teams, they have the best knowledge of their own components. So they need to be present. And after that, we can actually divide the labor between the front end and the back end team. So looking at these functions and asking ourselves, okay, is this function good enough? Does that meet the definition of ready? No, we have some outstanding questions. Okay, but that's good, because I was in those refinement sessions when we did that, so I can answer lots of those questions, and we can always go to the product owner or the stakeholders or the architect to get more information, okay? is the function small enough so that we can actually put it in a sprint? No, it might be divided, but yes, now we have enough of information so that we can divide it here. And the same goes here with this team. Since we have the people in the team has been in this process and taking, what do you call it, refining, getting knowledge of the proposed problem and the solution. They are. It is not that we have the team sitting and wondering, okay, what should we do now, and who should we call, and there ain't no. We're lacking information in the specification here. They will have all the information. So from oh, sorry.
You went to the next one.
Yes. So.
You spoiled the surprise.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Well, I was going to do a pop quiz here. I guess everybody saw the slide, so it's not really going to work at this point, unfortunately. So I'll just get right to it. I was going to ask everybody, so how do we accomplish this in large organizations? Do we put processes and structures in place? No. No, that's not how we accomplish it in large organizations. We accomplish it by making collections of people who collaborate with each other. We don't accomplish it by sending out spam emails to 500 people and waiting for responses to come in. So you can see here, if you'll notice, these are all the same people that were involved in the process at various points in time. This particular guy in this particular planning session is not really getting what he wants, unfortunately, but hopefully we get to him a sprint sometime soon. This guy seems to be terrified for some reason. I'm not really sure why he's so frightened, but the point here is we need to be getting the people who actually are going to do the work involved with the people who actually have the ideas and who have some commitment in seeing them come to fruition. So no complex tools for accomplishing this, just plain, simple people sitting in meetings. So, it's you again.
Scaling along the organization. So now, if we are to look at the backlog as a picture of the value flow in a development effort, that it starts off with fuzzy IDs, and then you refine it, and when you refine it, you can actually prioritize up it until you can implement it and putting out into the hands of the public. We saw there a couple of important things, things that you can manage without sometimes in small, low-risk Scrum environment, but which becomes crucial when you try to do it at scale. And for instance, the collaboration, the tight collaboration between different competences, between the stakeholders and these competences, that we actually meet and talk in order to understand the IDs. Not that the stakeholders have the IDs and then have someone else refining them and then pushes them downwards. No, by pulling the ID into the backlog and refining. And something that wasn't shown here was that the ID could be refined, and then when more people look at it, they discover more questions that we have, that we need more dialogue. So we have this pull flow in order to create a smooth flow inflow of requirements. And we have face-to-face communication. So that is what that is what we need. The other principle of Scrum that we really need to scale is the idea of the self-organizing team, and that has to do with that is a requirement in order to have a pulling sequence, right? Because if I have the mandate to pull in work into my team instead of Jeff having the mandate to push work into my team, then I need to have the mandate to self-organize. I need to have the mandate to understand what will be the requirements, my requirements on the requirements. What are the criteria for me bringing them in? The team has the definition of ready. That's a Scrum principle. And we need to adopt that Scrum principles at all levels in the backlog. That the different parts and the different collaborations should have a definition of ready. Now this is an ID. Now this becomes a function because we have cut it and made it clear. So self-organization is crucial. And not only within the Scrum team, but within in the stakeholder board, and within if you have that temporary team with an architect and representatives, they need to be self-organized as well.
So we're actually ahead of schedule, if you can believe that. First time ever, I think. Really quick question for everybody. Now, I know it's the end of the day and nobody's got energy, but I have a system for ensuring people respond when I ask questions. I'm going to ask the question. If nobody answers, we're going to sit here till it gets really awkward. So my question to you guys, anybody just throw out answers there. When and how do we find these people? Where do they come from? These stakeholder boards that make these decisions early on in the backlog. Sorry? From the company, absolutely. I'll give you a hint as to the answer I'm looking for. It's actually already up on the slide. Self-organizing teams. These stakeholder boards who make these decisions and figure out what we're going to prioritize next and what we're going to refine next, these are not static things. We don't start these 2 years ago and set a group of people and say, okay, there's the mailing list for the stakeholder board. They answer all the questions from now on. We need to be refining these all the time, looking at them. Who's in the room? Are they the people with the right skills? Are they the people with the right knowledge? Are they the people who are interested? Some people come, some people leave. This is why self-organization is so important in a scaling scenario. Otherwise, we just set up these boards, and you know these ones. People have worked in them for 30 years. They no longer care what happens to the product or anything like that. So self-organization, the people leave when they don't have anything more to contribute. More people come in when it's important for them to be there. So, and I went ahead too quickly once again. So in order to enable self-organizing teams, we need a crucial aspect. We need transparency, as Ola talked about, in the process. Because without transparency, there's no inspection and we can't provide adaptation. So let's talk about some realistic tools that we use in scaling situations, called visual management. Anybody seen one of these before? Okay, everybody's still awake. Good. We recognize these from our Kanban and Scrum implementations. These are a very common example for us of visual management. We see them all the time. But there's actually a lot of other tools for visual management that people aren't using a whole lot of the time. So here's a great example from Stockholm University. These people have actually visualized their entire value flow through the process, from the point that stuff comes into the backlog, worked on in sprints. I believe that's this is the planning session, this is the backlog, then the actual work done in the sprint and the delivery and everything around that. And this is really good. They keep this posted where everybody can see it, and then when they're doing retrospectives and things like that, they can identify which part of the process is at fault, and they can look into fixing that. So when they make an adjustment to this, they actually just stick a sticky up on there until their next retrospective, and then they see, has this taken root? Does it work well? Then they might reprint this, and this has become a permanent process, as permanent as anything we have in Scrum is. The other good thing about this setup, when you put them publicly in places in the company, is that the other people in the organization start to learn what Scrum is and how it works, and they can see, oh, I have an idea here, but the idea isn't enough. It needs to go through a whole process before it comes out. Here's an example of that from a project I currently work in with the Swedish State. We have this little guy. He's not very clear, but there's a little guy with a light bulb there. We have actually different backlogs containing different sorts of information, which are then combined together into this whole refinement session that's taking place here, the process we visualized earlier. Then we're dividing out between the different teams that are going to do the work, as we saw earlier. Then we have the actual sprint where the work gets done, and we can look down here and we can see the work being done. And then actually you see these red lines. These are really good. These visualize stuff that's actually beyond our control. Because we work with the state, we don't actually get to have access to all the servers and these types of things. This is a really great tool, once again, because the stakeholders, from the initial conception, we have this digitized so people can see it all throughout the company. They can see from initial conception all the way through the process to when their stuff gets done. And for instance, this area here, if a lot of stuff starts getting stuck here, they start to say, well, why does everything get stuck there? Well, actually, that's beyond our control, but we'd love to do something about it. So as I say, we have this digitized so everybody sees the flow through the process, but this, this discussion of having it on the wall, having the tactile discussion, very, very important, because if you just put up a digital board and say to everybody, oh, go look over there now, they'll really have no idea how the process flows at all. So having a collaboration amongst the people who are on that stakeholder board and seeing how our value gets delivered, very, very important. Oh.
Yeah, you can tell. This is another example of having a board. This ain't no Scrum team or having this. This is actually the tool that the super product owner at one place, together with a group of business analysts and one architect and a couple of testers who are working on refining ideas into larger functions or larger features that later on are about to be realized in I think about 5 parallel components but they need to work on stuff. So yes, of course they have. You don't see it, but there are Jira numbers here, IDs that push that you can follow and look up into the requirements database. The electronic backlog. But what this does is that this tells everybody in the organization, okay, the super requirements team, what are they looking into now? And here they have 2-week sprints on odd week numbers, so you can see what they have in their minds right now. And then they are typically 1 to 2 months ahead of implementation, but this means also that the implementers in the different teams can look and see here, okay, so we are about to actually do more search parameters into our search thing. Okay, now we get mentally accustomed to that idea, and we can have much more meaningful conversation when we take these requirements one step further. So I mean, if Scrum teams and Kanban teams, if it's a good idea for them to have visual management and so people can see their flow, well, then that's a good idea for other parts as well. For management, we could have shown you also impediment backlogs where you know the Scrum Masters in the organization collect impediments. And then those are put up on a wall as well, so that everyone sees that the group of Scrum Master together with the Agile coach works now on these impediments, these problems. All in all, so that information is very tangible and accessible to everyone throughout the whole organization in order to increase transparency. Because if we don't have transparency, actually, we won't have any power, right? If I am around, let's say I have the mandate to drive a car, I have a driver's license, I have the ability to drive a car as well. So you could say I have the power when I drive. But if you were to sit beside me and I was driving and then you covered my eyes, I would probably run off the road. So transparency is very, very important, and we do this at scale. Transparency becomes even more important. And it was one thing that I forgot to mention. When you do this at scale, you will also find that often management can be reluctant in delegating power. That is, management can be reluctant to the idea of self-organization when the organization is big or when the project is big. And often that can be for a good reason. The management might know that, hey, this organization isn't really mature enough for that level of self-organization that may be necessary. Yes, then I can tell them that, okay, the actual reason is that you have a lack of transparency. If you would have more transparency, then self-organization wouldn't be a problem. And having a lot of these kinds of boards and stuff up on the walls for everyone to see increases transparency so much so that the management can feel that, okay, this is cool. I can actually delegate mandate to these people, because if they go somewhat wrong, I will see it immediately. Here's another example of that kind of transparency synchronization tool. For each sprint there at the odd numbers, when we put up, I mean, there always is a project calendar, right? But that is often hidden in an Excel sheet or a project management tool, which means that dates tend to slip actually. But when we put up week numbers on simple post-its and had this now tag that was following along, and also with the simple post-it sticky note said, here is actually in this sprint we will have the code freeze. Then I don't remember the actual data, but we stop slipping those dates just by having them up on the wall. So that's here is the code freeze so that we can have the regression test in one of our testing environments and then put it into production. So this is also an example of a big visual calendar, also an example of that kind of tool that you could use in order to increase transparency, to improve self-organization.
Over and over and over again when we go to organizations, especially very large ones, you know, some of the ones we work with are 20,000 people worldwide, if not more. We hear the same thing over and over and over again. But we're too big to put stuff up on the wall. No, but then everybody's not going to have access to it and all these kind of things. But what you find when you look into the tools that they insist on using and integrating into the whole flow and so on and so forth, you find that nobody's actually looking at those either. So really, you're still getting a benefit by putting stuff up on the wall. So we go to digital tools as the absolute last resort, even in scaling organizations. If we can put something like this in the lobby, so when everybody comes into the building, they have a general idea what's going on, it's still better than burying it in some tool somewhere that nobody's ever going to look at or read. So. But all of this is visual management, helping the teams self-organize. Then we come to a part that we focus really, really, really heavily on when doing coaching. I guess, how many people here work as Agile coaches? Two? In the whole room? Really? Because I got a lot of business cards today. Is that just me? People were faking it? Okay. Getting tired, I see. We'll hurry this along. One of the areas we focus on a lot is the area of continuous improvement. Because as coaches, we actually get brought in for very brief periods of time most of the time. Not nearly as long as we'd like to get brought into organizations, especially huge ones. We work with one organization. We figured out if we were to spend 2 days with groups of 30 people, it would take us 10 years to speak to everybody in the organization. Good luck getting somebody to pay a consultant to come in for 10 years, although they often do in Sweden, but that's a whole other topic that I won't get into. Different discussion, Swedish labor laws and so forth. So we focus really, really heavily on continuous improvement. So we all know continuous improvement at the team level. We focus on how we work down here. We talk about how our process is. Do we need to implement a rule for this? Do we need to take away a rule for that? All these kind of things. We talk about continuous improvement at the team level all the time. But what most organizations skip is that in a scaling situation especially, you need to optimize the whole. You need to be looking at that all the time. So most organizations skip the continuous improvement that's got to take place up here, which is to optimize the flow through the entire process. And I don't know if it's big enough to see, but you can see it's the same people doing the continuous improvement up here as were the same people talking about the backlog and the same people talking about all the things we've talked about here, self-organizing teams. And we need to be looking at continuous improvement on this level as well, having regularly scheduled retrospectives, not coming in once every 2 years and saying, oh, this is all horribly broken, let's try a reorganization. They usually work really well, right? We throw everything into chaos for about 6 months to a year. Everybody gets really cranky and absolutely nothing changes at the end of it. No, that's not true. Everybody's titles change and people generally move their desks around. So we need to be looking at having regularly scheduled retrospectives in sprints with everybody who needs to optimize the whole as well. And once again, making that information transparent to the people in the organization so that they know things are changing. We're taking steps to address them. And also we work with these guys down here, we work a lot making them understand that these people up here don't have any more power to change every problem they have in the world than the people down below do. They can fix at best one thing at a time as well. They don't know if the changes they make are going to work. So we focus a lot on continuous improvement. When we run, for instance, a 2-day workshop, the second day of a workshop is always retrospective after retrospective after retrospective. Why? Because we're trying to stop this. Anybody been to these retrospectives before? You can identify these ones really easily. We call these, we have a term for this invented by Ola. Oh, by the way, interestingly enough, this is Ola. So everybody knows. We have a term invented by Ola that we use to describe this particular situation. It's called coffee room whining. Does anybody know what I mean when I say that? Maybe you've observed this in your organizations. I'm sure no one in this room actually does that, but you know, maybe you've seen your coworkers do it from time to time, possibly. Coffee room whining is really easy to identify. We see that everything is horribly, horribly broken, and that it is somebody else's fault. Oddly enough, never our fault. Always somebody else, and at least 97% of the time it's a manager whose fault it is. And then we all agree that it'll never change. We come back a few weeks later, we talk about the same 25 points again, we put them in an email again, we send them off to our manager, can you please go out and fix these, or we hand them over to the Scrum Master. This is a very, very counterproductive way of conducting a retrospective. Let's try to find one thing to focus on, and then let's approach it scientifically. Let's not just say, oh, this is horribly broken, send an email to the manager, can we please find a way to fix it? This is an example of a retrospective takeaway from teams that I work in. It is blurry intentionally, in case anybody's trying to read the right side. We try to approach retrospectives scientifically. We identify what it is we're talking about. We then have the root cause analysis, discuss it a little bit more, talk in depth. Could it be coming from process? Is it a knowledge issue? Is it a transparency issue? Whatever it might be. And then, really important, we don't come up with a fix. We design an experiment. We design something we're going to try for the next 2 weeks. We don't know if it's going to work. Nobody really knows if it's going to work. Anybody who claims they do, yeah, they're generally making it up. So we design an experiment, and then we define a success criteria. When we meet again in 2 weeks, how are we going to know if the experiment we tried has been successful or not? And then sometimes I like to identify somebody who's going to drive it forward. Let me just clarify what I mean when I say drive it forward. I don't mean who's going to go out and do it. Fixing things is the entire team's responsibility. It's the entire organization's responsibility. What I mean by someone to drive it forward is 3 or 4 days from now, when we see there's been absolutely no movement on the thing we all just agreed to do, that person's job is to go out there and keep that moving. I think you're up. Yeah. Yes.
So, what have we done? Yes, we have the notion that it's not about scaling Scrum. It's about having agility to work in a larger scale, by enforcing inspection and adaption, by taking what makes the magic in the Agile methods. Well, it's the increased level of transparency and the increased level of power at all levels, and making sure that these loops go fast enough. That is the main message, right? This is what will create agility in the small scale and in the large scale. In the large scale, it's much harder. So what have we done here? We have described one pattern, you could say, that we use in order to scale along the backlog, along the value flow. And we have also showed some techniques in order to scale through the organization by having self-organization not only within the teams, but also in the temporary interactions between teams at all levels. And the most important thing that actually drives the improvement is this continuous improvement. Because just as Jeff said, doesn't matter what management level you have, you don't have the power to fix every problem. You might have the mandate, but you don't have the power because you lack the ability. The continuous improvement needs to be a collaborative effort of the whole organization. And that actually boils down to this, because these are insights and that people need to know, and we also make sure that these insights get somewhat formalized in methods and patterns of behavior. But in the end of the day, it's all about an agile, transparent, let's fix it ourselves culture. And that is brought on by human-to-human interaction. So in every wave of change, there is always first the early adopters, the 10%, and then afterwards comes the whole flow. And then there is the guys who never want to change, but they have to move along. Now, the trick is that just as when you train to be a dancer or a martial artist, you do exercises, you apply techniques on yourself that hurt, that really hurt, and you don't want to go to practice today because every muscle in your body hurts. The same goes with the agile organization. The techniques that we employ, the level of transparency that is needed in order to make this work, it really hurts the organizational body. And the organizational body don't want to go to practice today. No, it doesn't feel okay. There will be resistance within the organization from all levels. Bosses who they thought that they loved this idea about agility, but when it became apparent that they had to participate in this transparency game, they weren't so happy about it anymore. There will be resistance at all levels. So the trick is, since, as Jeff mentioned, we are only there for not so much time as we would have liked, the trick is to find those early adopters, those people who are really into this, who sees what can agility do for us. How can that make us happy pandas and love our work? So we need to find these people and nurture their passion, because they are to be change agents within an organization that sometimes can be very hostile to it. I mean, a manager can say, we need to go agile, and still be against going agile because of the hurt that it takes. So one needs to find these 10% if one wants to have this change stick in the whole organization. And you need to nurture their passion. And what we do is that we try to set up at organizations that they should have like lean coffees inside the organization where the change agents meet and so on. We always offer people to write to us. We email address or have us on Twitter and so on and so forth, in order to be able to catch up when they think that, because we always say, well, 6 to 9 months from now your organization will be in pain, and 6 to 9 months they want to call someone, and then they can call us and also how should we do now, and so that you can push them and make them happy again, because really the passion is everything, and of course we use our communities like Scrum Bears and Göteborg Cyclists and invent those people there so that they can get a support structure.
Yeah, I would say when we identify people, when we identify people who we feel are early adopters, we see that passion early on in them. We seek, one of the biggest things we do is we seek to actively recruit them into our communities. And a little bit of a pro tip I figured out over the years, Scrum Bears, excellent facility for this, because it's difficult to get people to take an evening to go and sit around and talk about Agile. But it's actually fairly straightforward to get people to take an evening to go and sit around and drink beer. And then you can kind of sneak it up on them really easily like that. So yeah, we actively recruit them into our communities. We try to have informal lunches with them even when we're not getting paid. And we try to provide them the support that they need so that they don't lose confidence when things don't go well. Because we all know that none of this is easy to actually accomplish. Throwing post-it notes up on a board, super simple, of course. But to actually accomplish an organizational transformation takes time, there's a lot of pain, so we need to support those people, we need to nurture their passion. Because at the end of the day, large organizations are nothing more than a large collection of people. Organizations are made up of people. And any of us who have a lot of experience in Agile know that Agile spreads best from person to person. When you meet somebody who's passionate about agility and you listen to them and they speak to you and they get you passionate, and all of a sudden you've got the passion. And then you go out there and you speak to somebody else and you get the passion and you convince them, and then it multiplies like this. So along this theme, I want to say, I'm very, very happy to be speaking at Agile Vilnius this year, because a very interesting thing about that is the person who actually introduced me to agility is sitting in this room. And I don't think I've ever actually publicly thanked him for doing that. Or I'm not even sure I've ever thanked him, period. But I'm guessing most of you have probably been infected with his passion the same way I was. And you're going to excuse the butchering of the name. Vaidas Adamauskas, who is a speaker here at the conference. I had no idea when I met Vaidas so many years ago that the conversations we were having at the time were going to have such a profound impact on my life, that it was going to change the way I saw everything. So thank you to Vaidas for passing his passion along to me so I can go out and pass it along to everybody else. Another big round of applause for Vaidas.
And thank you, people of this conference who have put up with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, now I believe we have a couple of minutes for questions, if anyone should have.
Okay, any questions? Why does?
I'm not sure this is a good idea.
No, I'll be serious. I'm blushing, of course, and all that stuff, but I have a serious question. You showed lots of post notes, and you kind of have answered that question, but I just want to really be sure. You showed lots of about visual management, post notes, and everything is very nice in handwritten. And on the other hand, you're talking about huge organization, you know, a few thousand people. I have very hard time convincing an organization that there's more than 20 people stop using software tool because all developers love it, and then managers need all reports. So how the hell I don't know, the CEO of, I don't know, I just not name like Ericsson, you know, in Sweden, would know how the process is going. He is walking in the corridor and looking against sticky notes.
Yeah, but the detail level is very important here, because if you, the team that works with something, they put up sticky notes because it's easier than to sit in a tool. And I mean, what is it that when you want aggregated reports, then of course you can have data in an electronic format, but that would be aggregations. So I mean, I wouldn't trust a system where we for instance had Jira to measure cycle times and then creating a report with aggregated cycle times, because that would be full of so much sources of error. I basically train the teams to have just a couple of data items ready. How many stories, alternatively, how many points did they accomplish, how many of those were sudden stuff that impacted them, how many person days were involved, and what were any percents of overtime in the sprint. And that's basically just for one team for 2 weeks. So that you can always aggregate. But then again, the experience is that, yeah, cool, let's have electronic tools, but then, yeah, let's just do it by hand.
Or if you take, if you take this one, for example, this is a good example. This doesn't actually exist as a physical tool on a wall anymore. This was converted to a digital tool, but having that initial discussion where people collaborate and draw lines on a board and say, oh, but what about this situation when a bug comes in and we need to bypass the system and all these kind of things. Having that as a tactile discussion is very important. After that, you can convert over to using tools. Always, always, always the simplest tools you can possibly find. But of course you can digitize it. But people often, especially at the higher levels of organizations, they don't always understand what they're seeing in the digital tool anyway. So have the tactile discussion with them, make them understand, and then say, and over here we have it so that you can visualize it from your desk.
Yeah. Any more questions?
Any questions?
Yes, sir.
For those who are not yet passionate about Agile, could you or Vaidas make them passionate right now?
Haven't we? We tried for 50 minutes. I'm so sorry we didn't manage. But you can come over to Gothenburg and have a beer.
I think I have a solution.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally quite excited to be back in Vilnius. You have excellent beer. You have excellent beer snacks. You have, is it called 999? Yeah, 999, I believe it's called. So, you know, you can always come and join me for a beer this evening, and I can do my very best to convey the passion at that point. I don't think Vitus is available, unfortunately.
We get together, we talk about what we care, we get afterwards to drink beers, and that's how we do. So anyone who wants to be passionate, join people who are passionate, and that's what we do.
One more question, I think you have. Yeah.
Thanks. I want to get back to your example with 2 teams and scaling.
I seem to have broken the
Yes,
thing.
okay,
that's
sorry.
okay.
No,
But
no.
the question is, you mentioned that 2 teams working, one as a backend, another as a frontend.
Yes.
Was it in sake of example, or you really suggest to split the teams
No.
by layers?
I never suggest to split teams. If you can have feature teams, that's best. But the actual example are from a couple of places. One places where we can't mention name, the actual application stack is 19 levels. And like 20, 30 teams or something. At other places like Försäkringskassan in Sweden, as a governmental organization, we also have these lot of different teams. They have a legacy, and really, if you're expert in one system, you're really not expert in the other, and then you're supposed to create a feature that should integrate between like 3 or 4 systems. Then you really cannot toss people around because you will break stuff. So then the question becomes, okay, it's better in order to keep stable teams, it's better to toss the work around. Then how can we toss the work around in order so that we won't drop our understanding? So that's, yeah.
Absolutely, if you can achieve cross-functionality, and we definitely try to advocate this whenever possible, it's the much better option to go with. But when you have a particular piece of hardware that is written in a language that about 40 people in the entire world even understand, and it's taken them their entire lives to get good at it. I again can't give the specific example, unfortunately, but there's a company in Sweden that has a language very much like this that's so old that everybody who knows it is starting to retire now. It's a great example of where you really can't have a cross-functional team that knows this language. There's literally like 20 people left in the working world who actually know anything about it. So, but absolutely, we strongly, strongly, strongly advocate cross-functionality if at all possible. And we don't accept it on the first go when they say we can't do that. It's impossible.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Last question. Okay, sit there. Hand.
I want to ask a question same to the previous one. How do you secure the integration is working? Which team is responsible for that?
Yes, the integration. First of all, the integration becomes a mutual interest when the architect and the people from the different teams are collaborating actively. Then they say, okay, what kind of protocol should we have between each other? Then the question, whose responsibility is it? Someone needs to be a driver, and I have successfully used 2 patterns. The first pattern is if there is a natural hierarchy, for instance, if you have the front-end team that is actually interacting with the user, and then the front-end team needs to call some back-end component, then often it's the front-end team that act as a stakeholder towards the back-end team, so they kind of drive the integration. Another example, the pattern that we have in a situation where there aren't no really clear owner of the resulting solution, is where people, which is very much like what's written here, people from one team and people from the other team form a pair, and they together takes the responsibility to act as a stakeholder to see that the integration works. So to have one from team A, one from team B, with the help of an architect, but it becomes this pair's responsibility to drive the very integration.
Again, they need to self-organize to achieve this, and they need to be retrospecting on their progress all the time in order to improve.
Exactly, because this is pulled. Team A and Team B pulls, and we need to collaborate on this. Oh, we need the help of an architect. Oh, let's design the solution. Oh, you and I, let's make sure that this solution comes alive. It's all about pulling. Yes.
Yeah.
Ah, look.
So no more questions now. If you have questions, please feel free
we will
after
be available.
Closing.
Yes, of course.
And we want to thank you. Oh,
I've been curious about what these are all day.
Thank you. I dropped your on the floor, Jeff. It's okay, right?
Apologies.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And now